defenders in the region and in the world. Allow me to recognize the government of Spain to offer the pavilion, but overall the Club de Madrid. The Club de Madrid is the institution that gathered us together today and offer this side event. This side event is critical in this moment in the region. If you listen the message of the Secretary General, we reach the 1.5 degrees over the pre-industrial level, and this means that we need to change the model. And we need to change the model, the economic model, in a very dramatic way, in a very difficult moment. There is all the indicators about democracy in the world are telling us that the capacity and the strength of democracy are going down. We also see a crisis of the multilateralism. And we are not listening the voices of the people. So to change the model, we need to listen the voices of the people, and the environmental defenders are those that has been speaking for more than 20 years how to change the model, how to consider the people, and how to achieve these solutions that can promote sustainable development. But yet, the situation of the environmental defenders in the region and in the world is awful. You know that Latin America and the Caribbean is the worst region to defend the environment. The majority of people that is killed are in Latin America. It's 80% of the region. Colombia is leader in the statistics, but there is a lot of lack of information, so probably it will be much more people affected. So this panel will be about how we can protect the environmental defenders, because are those who are raising the voice for the environment. But I would like to mention as well that to protect the environmental defenders, probably we need to protect our democracies. We are in a real moment of risk for the democracies, for the environmental democracies in the world and in the region. So as I mentioned, I have a standing panel here, and I will start presenting one and giving the floor to the first panelist. The first panelist is Michelle Bachelet. You all know her. She was my president in Chile twice, but also she was High Commissioner of Human Rights in the United Nations. And she, by the way, was one of the actors in the first conference of the Party of the Escazú Agreement as well. So, Michelle, you are also the Vice President of Club de Madrid, and the Club de Madrid is one of the institutions that are leading this initiative that is LEAD, which is an initiative to gather all the people together to defend environmental protections. So how, in your role in Club de Madrid and connected with the LEAD initiative, are you planning to recognize, protect the environmental defenders in the region? How, in this process, you can connect the climate actions and the climate discussions with the human rights agendas, and also how we can ensure the participation and the protection of the environmental defenders in this process. You have the floor and you can come here.
I'm smaller. Well, thank you, Carlos, for that question. As you have mentioned, the situation of environmental human rights defender is very difficult, very fragile, and every year women and men lose their lives, but also, and just because they're protecting land, water, and biodiversity that sustain their communities. And you mentioned that in 2024, there was many environmental human rights defender was killed, 80% you said in the region, and we're talking about 146 persons. And it's not about numbers, it's about people, about their lives. That data comes from the last report of Global Witness that mentions this is the number of people who have been killed or disappeared. And we're not talking just about a statistic, because they represent lives, families, communities who suffer and resist in the face of violence and impunity. During my time as High Commissioner for Human Rights, I witnessed this reality firsthand. Whenever I went to different places in the world, I could meet with environmental human rights defenders who were sharing with me their reality. Because those defenders were committed to protecting their territories, often under the direct threat, physical and psychological violence, criminalization, and even judicial persecution. And I guess many of you will tell us your own stories and your own experience. But let me say something, because before being High Commissioner for Human Rights, I was the first Executive Director of UN Women in the UN. So I have to mention that women defenders are usually at even greater risk. Sexual violence, threat to their integrity. Of course, also now we have cyber violence, but offline and online, and attacks who intend, first of all, to silence them, to dismantle peace, social justice, life, and community resilience. And I think, having been in office, the role of a government is clear. They must ensure public policies and legal frameworks that ensure the safety of those who defend the environment. Probably the minister will tell us soon, because there are recent advances, such as Brazil's National Plan for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders. But then we also have international instruments, like the Escazú Agreement. And I think you mentioned, Carlos, that we need, if we want to defend environmental human rights defenders, we need to defend democracy. On Sunday, we have elections in my country. And there are some not very democratic leaders who have said that if they are elected, they're going to get out of Escazú Agreement, among other things. So we need to ensure that those instruments that we have fought for a long time. In my government, we were part of the negotiation and agreement on Escazú, and I was also at the Paris COP. And the Escazú Agreement has an article, Article 9, who established concrete protection measures for environmental human rights defenders. But also, and probably Michelle will speak to us about the Aarhus Convention, demonstrate that both tools, it means that there are tools, so we can act. But I have to say as well that law alone is not enough. We need leaders with political will, with determination, and that will implement. And that's the idea of this COP, to pass from diagnosis, we all know what's going on, we all know what happens, we all know what needs to be done. Now it's time, as President Lula said, to implement it. So we must protect those who risk everything for life and their territories. And government must respond to violence. They have to investigate attacks, ensure justice, and recognize especially the leadership of women defenders as guardians of their communities and their ecosystem. And you ask us about LEAD. LEAD is the new leaders network for environmental activists and defenders. And I believe this has to be a crucial space because it puts together leaders, governmental or at local levels as well, defenders and experts to exchange experiences, strengthen protection networks, and advance collective action, and also to share what works. And in that sense, I'm really interested in listening to you to tell us in your own experience what really has worked. The other thing I want to say is that real transformation demands genuine commitment from state, effective protection, public recognition, inclusion in decision making. I think that's one of the things that defenders feel they're not there yet. They're not being incorporated yet in the decision making. But on the other hand, we need them because they know what's happening to them. They can tell us what works and what cannot work, doesn't work. So we can find together, I mean, leaders and defenders and experts, the best strategies and the best protection measures. At the Cruz de Madrid, we're committed to ensuring that all defendants, especially women, but not only women, are protected, are recognized, and meaningfully included in decision-making process that affect their territories and their communities. I am convinced in my own experience that through dialogue to hearing each other, to understand better the problem, to include who are the ones who have the threats and are living in terrible situation, and cooperation between all these partners, leaders, governments, and civil society. We can design concrete strategies to strengthen the protection mechanism and expand defenders' participation in environmental governance. If we do not protect these individuals, you, if we don't give you a voice, safety, and recognition, we're not only failing you and all of the others like you who risk everything for the planet, we are failing the future of all of us. So it is time to act, as you said, to protect, to recognize, and to include those who defend the land, the water, and life itself. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And now I would like to introduce to Michael Forst. He's a leader in the defense of the human rights. He's now the Special Rapporteur of Environmental Human Rights Defenders under the Aarhus Convention, but before, he was the United Nations Special Rapporteur for the protections of human rights defenders. So he has a long-standing trajectory, and I might say that the Aarhus Convention is a kind of brother of the Escazú Agreement, and we have bridged a lot of bridges, and this is one of the questions for you. In your role there in Europe and the Aarhus Convention, and as a part of the lead initiative, how we can build these bridges, how the multilateralism can help to protect environmental defenders, and how we can collaborate among regions, Latin America, Europe, but also Asia and Africa. So, Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and happy to be there with you today. I was explaining that for me, Club de Madrid has now changed in a new, very positive direction for democracy, for respect of human rights, and support to defenders. The statement I've prepared for the panel today has been very much inspired by the 10 consultations I held with defenders on the 5 continents. And I've been really inspired by those testimonies, not only of suffering, but also testimonies of hopes that we will gain the battle, we will win the battle for democracy, for human rights. And as UN Special Rapporteur on environmental defenders, I have witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences when those who defend our planet are silenced, are criminalized, and killed. We gathered now at COP30 to advance climate justice and just transition, yet the very people essential to achieving this, environmental defenders, are under unprecedented attack. Let me be blunt today. The so-called just transition risks being just only for the global north, while perpetuating injustice in the south. We speak of transitioning on renewable energy, yet the transition demands massive extraction of lithium, cobalt, copper, rare earth minerals. And where are those rare minerals extracted? Precisely from indigenous territories, from the Amazon, from communities in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, continents that never caused the climate crisis, but are now told by the North that they must sacrifice their lands, sacrifice their water, their livelihood for batteries and solar panels that will power northern consumptions. For us, for defenders, a just transition cannot mean replacing oil extraction with lithium extraction on indigenous lands without consent. It cannot mean green energy infrastructures that displaces communities. It cannot mean conservation projects that criminalize traditional land while allowing industrial destructions elsewhere. Environmental defenders understand this hypocrisy. They resist, not because they oppose climate action, but because they oppose a transition that maintains the same colonial pattern of resource extraction, just with a green label. A just transition for them must be just if built on silencing those who advocate for environmental protection and community rights. Defenders, that's what they told me, they are not obstacles, they are architects of truly sustainable development. They promote ecological agriculture, they protect biodiversity, they uphold traditional resource management, they resist the extractivism, whether fossil or green, that violates community rights. To conclude, when we criminalize peaceful protest, when we label defenders eco-terrorists, when we allow corporate impunity while persecuting defenders, we reproduce the same exclusion and violence that caused the climate crisis. Brazil, as COP30 host, has a unique opportunity to redefine what just transition means, to demonstrate that protecting the Amazon means protecting those who defend and respect indigenous sovereignty over their territories and resources. Brazil has a unique opportunity to demonstrate that a just transition means justice for defenders and for the communities who bear the cost of both the climate crisis and the proposed solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel. We have to follow up in the near future for the collaboration. And now I have the real pleasure, bem-vinda, Ministra. She's the Minister of Human Rights and Citizenship of Brazil, but overall, she's a Brazilian teacher, a real worker with the communities. She has been the whole life working for the people, for those povos da Brazil. It's a pleasure for me. It's a real pleasure for me to have you here. So now Brazil has approved in the Congress the National Plan for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders. They just enacted, and it's a very good achievement, so parabéns para você. The Congress also has approved the Escazú Agreement recently, last week. So we expect now in the Senate. And I want you that now that you have this national plan, now we need implementation, which is what we have been discussing here in the COP. We need implementation of what we promised, so now we need implementation in Brazil. So how are we going to do that? Which are the next steps? And I will ask about the difficulties that you are envisioning. So you have, if you want to speak from there or from here, it's up to you.
Alô, alô? Bom dia, é uma grande alegria e também com o coração atento, né, à dor do nosso tempo, que a gente participa desse encontro promovido pelo Clube de Madrid sobre os desafios da proteção ambiental nas democracias e as lutas de defensoras e defensores de direitos humanos e ambientalistas.
So, good morning. It is with great joy and also attentive to pain of our time that we participate in this meeting promoted by the Club of Madrid on the challenges of environmental protection in democracies and the struggle of human rights environmental defenders.
No dia 8 de novembro, o Brasil foi novamente abalado por uma catástrofe climática. No município de Rio Bonito do Iguaçu, no estado do Paraná, um tornado com ventos superiores a 200 km por hora destruiu bairros inteiros, deixando 6 pessoas mortas, centenas de feridas e quase 1000 desabrigadas. As imagens que chegam de lá são duras e nos convocam à reflexão sobre o tempo em que vivemos. A crise climática não é mais uma previsão. Ela está aqui e atinge com mais força as pessoas que já viviam em situação de vulnerabilidade.
So, on November 8th, Brazil was once again shaken by a climate catastrophe. In the municipality of Rio Bonito do Iguaçu, in the state of Paraná, a tornado with winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour destroyed entire neighborhood, leaving 6 people dead, 100 injured, and nearly 1,000 homeless. The images that arrived from there are harsh and call us to reflect on the times in which we live. The climate crisis is no longer a prediction. It is here, and it hits harder those who were already living in vulnerable situations.
Quando um desastre dessa magnitude acontece, não são apenas casas que desabam, são histórias, redes de convivência e laços comunitários que se rompem. E, como tantas vezes na história, as mulheres, as crianças e os povos tradicionais são os mais afetados. São eles e elas que, diante do colapso, sustentam a vida, cuidam, acolhem, procuram alimento e abrigo, mantêm a solidariedade viva. Por isso, reafirmamos, proteger as pessoas mais vulneráveis é um dever do Estado e um compromisso da democracia.
When a disaster of this magnitude occurs, it is not only houses that collapses, it is stories, networks of coexistence, and community ties that are broken. And as so often in history, women, children, and traditional peoples are the most affected. It is they who, in face of collapse, sustain life. They care, welcome, seek food and shelter, and keep solidarity alive. Therefore, we reaffirm, protecting the most vulnerable people is a duty of the state and a commitment of democracy.
É com esse espírito de urgência e responsabilidade que o Ministério dos Direitos Humanos e da Cidadania está lançando durante a COP30 o protocolo de atendimento a populações vulneráveis em grandes desastres. Esse protocolo nasce das várias experiências do Ministério com pessoas e comunidades atingidas em diferentes regiões do país e da cooperação com órgãos públicos, organizações da sociedade civil e o Alto Comissariado das Nações Unidas para os Direitos Humanos, que tem atuado conjuntamente na consolidação de parâmetros de acolhimento, monitoramento e resposta humanitária baseada em direitos. O documento estabelece diretrizes para garantir o acolhimento digno, o acesso à informação, o atendimento humanitário, articulado à proteção de grupos específicos, mulheres, crianças, pessoas com deficiência, população em situação de rua, povos e comunidades tradicionais. A mensagem é clara. Diante das catástrofes climáticas, a ação humanitária precisa ser também ação de direitos humanos, enraizada na solidariedade e na presença concreta do Estado junto às pessoas.
It is with this spirit of urgency and responsibility that the Ministry of Human Rights and Citizenship is launching during COP30 the protocol for assistance to vulnerable populations in major disasters. This protocol stems from the various experiences of the ministry with people and communities affected in different regions of the country, and from cooperation with public bodies, civil society, and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, which have been working together to consolidate parameters for reception, monitoring, and humanitarian response based on rights. The document establishes guidelines to guarantee dignified reception, access to information, coordinated humanitarian assistance, and the protection of specific groups, women, children, people with disabilities, the homeless population, and traditional peoples and communities. The message is clear. In the face of climate catastrophes, humanitarian action must be also a human rights action, rooted in solidarity and the concrete presence of the state alongside the people.
A cada evento extremo, o Brasil reafirma que política ambiental e política de direitos humanos são dimensões inseparáveis. Não há futuro possível sem justiça climática, e não há justiça climática sem democracia. As comunidades que vivem e resistem na Amazônia, no Cerrado, na Caatinga, nos vários biomas brasileiros, nas periferias urbanas, são as mesmas que enfrentam a desigualdade, o racismo ambiental e a omissão histórica do poder público. A defesa dessas comunidades é, portanto, a defesa da própria democracia.
With each extreme event, Brazil reaffirms that environmental policy and human rights policy are inseparable dimensions. There is no possible future without climate justice, and there is no climate justice without democracy. The communities that live and resist in the Amazon, the Cerrado, and the urban peripheries are the same ones that face inequality, environmental racism, and the historical mission of public power. The defense of these communities is therefore the defense of democracy itself.
Foi com esse horizonte que, no dia 5 de novembro de 2025, o governo federal publicou o decreto número 12.710, que institui o Plano Nacional de Proteção a Defensoras e Defensores de Direitos Humanos, uma conquista construída coletivamente a muitas mãos ao longo de 2 décadas. Desde a criação do programa em 2004, ainda voltado a conflitos fundiários na Amazônia Legal, o Brasil vem ampliando seu alcance para incluir defensoras e defensores urbanos, quilombolas, comunicadores, ambientalistas, lideranças de mulheres, juventudes e comunidade LGBTQIA+. Essa política, ela não nasceu em gabinete, ela foi construída na prática e no diálogo constante com os territórios. O grupo técnico Salles Pimenta, criado em resposta à sentença da Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos, foi decisivo nesse processo.
So, it was within this horizon that on November 5th this year, the federal government published Decree number 12.710, which established the National Plan for Protection of Human Rights Defenders, an achievement built collectively by many hands over 2 decades. Since the creation of the program in 2004, initially focused on land conflicts in the illegal Amazon, Brazil has been expanding its reach to include urban defenders, quilombola communities, communicators, environmentalists, women's leaders, youngest, youth, and LGBTQI+ communities. This policy was not born in an office. It was built in practice and through constant dialogue with the territories. The Salles Pimenta Technical Group, created in response to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights sentence against Brazil, was decisive in this process.
Hoje, o programa de proteção acompanha 1.485 pessoas defensoras, entre elas, mais de 400 lideranças ligadas à luta pela terra e cerca de 50 defensoras ambientais. 7 em cada 10 são pessoas negras, indígenas ou pardas, e mais de 30% são mulheres. Cerca de 80% pertencem a povos e comunidades tradicionais, indígenas, quilombolas, extrativistas, pescadores artesanais, ribeirinhos, povos de matriz africana, geraizeiros, veredeiros e ciganos.
Today, the protection program supports 1,500 human rights defenders, including more than 400 leaders involved in the struggle for land and approximately 50 environmental defenders. 7 out of 10 are Black, indigenous, or mixed-race people, and more than 30% are women. About 80% belong to traditional people and communities, indigenous, quilombola, extractivists, artisanal fishermen, riverside dwellers, people of African descent, gerazeiros, veredeiros, and Roman people.
Esses números falam por si. Proteger defensoras e defensores é proteger a diversidade, os saberes ancestrais e o vínculo entre pessoas e territórios. Nós estamos muito convencidos que defender defensores é também defender a terra, os territórios onde eles vivem. O novo Plano Nacional, e indo para a sua pergunta, consolida uma governança interministerial. Isso é muito importante. Até então, o programa ele era coordenado pelo Ministério dos Direitos Humanos. Toda a gestão era desse ministério. E a gente trabalhava em cooperação com outros órgãos governamentais, mas essa cooperação ela era ainda muito informal. A partir do plano, estabelecemos protocolos específicos e trazendo novos conceitos da proteção dos indivíduos para a proteção coletiva de povos indígenas, quilombolas e defensores ambientais. O plano também está alinhado ao acordo de Escazú, que a gente aprovou na Câmara e agora para o Senado. O tratado regional que garante o acesso à informação, a participação pública e a justiça em temas ambientais. E a ratificação foi aprovada na Câmara dos Deputados e segue para o Senado Federal. Trata-se de um passo decisivo para que o Brasil una, de forma coerente, sua legislação interna e seus compromissos internacionais.
These numbers speak for themselves. Protecting defenders is protecting diversity, ancestral knowledge, and the bond between people and territory. And we are convinced that defending defenders is defending territory, where they are. The new national plan consolidates interministerial governance, and going to your question, and establishes specific protocols for the collective protection of indigenous people. So it's not only individual protection, but also now we go forward to collective protection. It is aligned within the Escazú Agreement, a regional treaty that guarantees access to information, public participation, and justice environmental issues, and whose ratification has been approved in the Chamber of Deputies and then moved on the federal state. This is a decisive step towards Brazil coherently unifying its domestic legislation and its international commitments.
Essas ações mostram que o Brasil não se limita a firmar tratados, constrói políticas de Estado que materializam os direitos humanos. Durante a 45ª reunião de altas autoridades de direitos humanos do Mercosul, sob a liderança do Brasil, reafirmamos que a crise climática é também uma crise da democracia e propusemos uma agenda regional de proteção a defensoras e defensores ambientais e comunicadores, fortalecendo a integração latino-americana.
These actions show that Brazil does not limit itself to signing treaties. It builds state policies that materialize human rights. During the 45th meeting of High Authorities on Human Rights in the Mercosul, Brazil reaffirmed that the climate crisis is also a crisis of democracy and proposed a regional agenda for the protection of environmental defenders and communicators, strengthening Latin American integration.
Defender quem defende a vida é defender a democracia. Quando protegemos uma liderança ambiental ameaçada, preservamos não apenas uma pessoa, mas a própria possibilidade de que o povo fale, participe e transforme. É a mesma luta contra o racismo ambiental, contra as desigualdades estruturais e contra as múltiplas formas de violência que ainda ferem o país. A COP30, realizada na Amazônia, nos inspira a pensar o futuro a partir do território. Como ensinou Paulo Freire, é preciso pensar e agir a partir de onde nossos pés pisam. E o que o Brasil oferece ao mundo é exatamente isso, um projeto de democracia enraizado no chão da floresta, na sabedoria dos povos e na força das mulheres. Seguiremos com esperança e coragem, fortalecendo políticas que não se limitem à retórica, mas que transformem a vida concreta das pessoas, porque ninguém ficará para trás. E porque no Brasil, defender o meio ambiente é defender a vida, o povo e a própria ideia de humanidade. Muito obrigada.
Yeah. So defending those who defend life is defending democracy. When we protect a threatened environmental leader, we preserve not only a person, but the very possibility of the people to speak, participate, and transform. It is the same fight against environmental racism, against structural inequalities, and against the multiple forms of violence that still wound the country. COP30, held in the Amazon, inspires us to think about the future from the perspective of the territory. As Paulo Freire thought, it is necessary to think and act from where your feet stand. And what Brazil offers the world is exactly that, a project of democracy rooted in the forest floor, in the wisdom of the people, and in the strength of women. We will continue with hope and courage, strengthening policies that are not limited to rhetoric, but that transforms to concrete lives of people, because no one will be left behind. And because in Brazil, defending the environment is defending life, the people, and the very idea of humanity. Thank you.
Muito obrigado pela sua fala, ministra. Un honor. And now we are going outside of Latin America and the Caribbean. We are going to India. Jiten Juman, he's a human rights defender, advocate, indigenous, and he has been suffering for defending the environment in India, in the state of Manipur. So now my question to you is, in your role as advocacy of the environment, suffering the intimidations and also the arrest of yourself, I wonder how you can, which are the mechanisms that you have developed to defend yourself, the early response mechanisms that you might improve, and which are the solutions that you can ask to the rest of us to implement.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to share on the protection of human rights and environmental defenders. I come from the state of Manipur in northeast part of India. The realities in Amazon is very much similar to what is happening in my part of the world. And in fact, if you look at the geography of Amazon, we have the Amazon River, the Andes Mountains, and in northeast part of India, we have the Himalayas, with all the melting glaciers, the climate crisis. And then our land is also very rich in biodiversity, and we have multiple rivers, the Brahmaputra River, the Barak River, the Tipaimok. There are so many other rivers in our region. So when I talk about our experience, I would like to share our struggle against some of the development aggression that we all talk about in the Amazon here. So in my part of the world, we have multiple rivers. So what we confront is the construction of large hydropower projects, multiple dams in our project, very big ones. And also the push for oil and gas exploration. And then, of course, we also see the pursuance of aggressive mining operation in my part of the world. And then, of course, the pursuance of infrastructure projects, roads, railway, high voltage transmission and distribution line. We know that these are important for development, but then what is a matter of concern is the need for stronger recognition of the indigenous people's rights, but also the need for the stronger recognition of the rights and the role of the environmental and human rights defenders. So I would like to share some of our response. And then, of course, there are multiple challenges, but then some of the response also help in protecting our land, in defending our land. And for doing that, what is most important is the strengthening of the community response, the community ownership, and I think that is extremely important. We can only defend our land and resource and territory when the communities are strong. When the communities are strong, then they can engage with the government, they can engage with the corporations, they can engage with the international financial institutions which are increasingly ever present in indigenous and many other territories in the name of development, in the name of responding to climate crisis. So what is extremely important to build the community resilience and strength is the information. So we really need to build up the clear information about how the kind of unsustainable development push will impact on indigenous peoples, on our land rights, on our physical relationship with our land, impact on our culture, on our spiritual aspect. You know, so that information is extremely important. We need to pass on the right information with the community. And because this is important, because there is a lot of misinformation, there is a lot of manipulation of information, and there is also a process of excluding indigenous and other environmental communities from the decision-making process. So what is extremely important is the rightful participation of the indigenous peoples and other community. For the participation, what is extremely important is getting the information. So that's why for indigenous peoples, it's about the right to free, prior, and informed consent. And for the informed consent, what is important is the recognition of indigenous people's right over our land and territory. And I think that is extremely important because the recognition of rights is also associated with recognition of the traditional way of life that help in the protection and the sustainable management and environment of our land and the river and the forest and the wetlands and the, you know, and all the air and all the oceans that we manage for a long time sustainably. And I think that is the most important aspect. And the second part is building the unity and solidarity of the community, indigenous people. I think that is actually important because when the development aggression is pursued, when dams are pursued in our land, when oil exploration is pursued, mining is pursued, there is always an element that try to divide the community. They try to break the unity of the community, and that's how they will try to intrude. You know, there will be threats, there will be intimidation, attacks. So when we talk about the threats to environment defenders, when we talk about attack on the indigenous peoples, why they are attacking? Because it's aimed to break the unity and it's to create fear and psychological trauma among the indigenous peoples and other communities so that they stop defending their land. You know, so that is one way of taking away the land and resource. So that's why the best strategy that we need is to strengthen the unity and solidarity of all the indigenous peoples and all other communities. No? And I think that is actually important. And then another strategy that we feel is extremely important is to build our capacity, the leadership, not the youths, the indigenous women, and also the community elders. And I think the leadership is extremely important because that is only when we can engage with the government. That is only when we can engage with all the corporations and the financial institutions that are taking away our land without our permission, without our consent. So that's why building that capacity and the strength is extremely important to defend our land. And why is also extremely important to emphasis on the leadership role of indigenous women and also the women in particular in general is because whenever development aggression is pursued in our land, it often involves conflict, tension. You know, there is always multiple conflict with the government, conflict with the companies, conflict with the military, conflict within the community. And in that situation, it's extremely important for indigenous women to take that role for conflict resolution to foster unity and solidarity, you know, and I think that is actually important. And in our strategy, another strategy that, and also a concern that we all need to address is the increased presence of the corporations, multinational companies, the financial institutions. Like in my part of the world, the Asian Development Bank is extremely heavily involved in many of the projects, both for climate solution, both for, in the name of development and so many other projects, the World Bank. So it's also important when we talk about the protection of defenders, the responsibility is not just the government, but also for the companies, the corporations, and also the financial institutions. They also need very strong legislation and policy to protect human rights defenders, to protect indigenous rights. And I think that is a challenge. In my part, one big challenge is many of the financing by the multilateral development banks, because they are now increasingly financing on the climate solutions, large dam, mega solar projects, geothermal, national parks, the protected area. So it's extremely important that we ensure that the financial institutions also have clear-cut policy to protect defenders and indigenous rights. So that is one that I would like to highlight from our own experience. And another important aspect that I also want to emphasize is building the strength of the community, the community strength. That is extremely important because that is the foundation for us to defend ourselves, whenever, to prevent reprisal, to prevent attack. When the community is strong, they can engage the law enforcement agency, they can engage the government, they can engage everyone. So, and whenever somebody got attacked, somebody got threatened, then the community can come together and challenge, and again, they can also negotiate, they can also pressure the government and all to recognize the rights of the communities. They can also uphold, and also when the community is strong, they can even engage the government to frame concrete policy to protect defenders, to protect the rights of women. And I think I really appreciate the presentation from the minister that there is a policy to protect the environment defenders in Brazil. I think that's a very encouraging sign, that something that we can all emulate, take away in other parts of the world. And this is something that we can press our governments, respectively in Asia, in other places, so that there is a very strong emphasis to frame policy for the rights of indigenous peoples and other communities. And I would also want to highlight, again, touch on the policy aspect, because now one of the big challenges, and this is something that I also hear from some of the panels in this forum, in many of the side events, that there are dilution of environment policy. Dilution of policy, this is happening. Why? It's part of the liberalization of policy, the deregulation of policy. So I think this is a big concern, because why policy dilution is happening? Like in India, for example, the environmental laws are diluted, the forest laws are diluted. It's weakening. And why it's weakening? Because it's actually taking away the rights from the community, but giving the rights to the companies, to the corporates. And I think there is a business model of development, the economic model of development, which is rooted in profit, by taking away the land. And I think this is something that we all need to respond. And I would also request all the governments and also all the participants here, and also the fellow indigenous peoples and other organizations to advocate, to engage in policy advocacy, so that the government stop diluting policy. Instead of that, they should strengthen the policy for the rights of the indigenous peoples, for the rights of the human rights defenders, and also to frame policy that recognize the intrinsic role of the indigenous peoples and other communities in defending the land, and also recognizing the intrinsic physical, the cultural, the spiritual relationship with our land. And I think that is actually important. And finally, just a message for the Amazon region. because we are facing with challenges, multiple challenges, but we are also facing with new challenges. New challenges, the challenges of now in the name of climate solution, there are also problematic climate solution. Sometimes we say it's a false climate solution. So now we are seeing the push for the mining of critical mineral, the push for this renewable energy, just transition, but then it involves the very pursuance of the destructive, unsustainable push for the mega project that has already created climate crisis and other forms of environmental crisis and the rights violation. So it's extremely important that we respond to those kind of new realities. Like even the Amazon basin, I think that is extremely important, and also to engage with the respective government to stop dilution of policy. And then my last response suggestion to the Amazon group is to strengthen the unity and the leadership of the community, because that's the basis. If people are not united, if the indigenous group, if all the environmental groups in Amazon are not united, it will be easy for the corporates, for the international financial institutions to increasingly, slowly targeting the land and the territory. And another very important from our experience is the dimension of conflict, because we cannot ignore the dimension of conflict, because the push for unsustainable development, the push for false climate solution, it involves creating conflict. It involves dividing the community. So the communities have to come together and force unity and find ways to combat all forms of divisive, all forms of divide and rule. And sometimes those conflicts can go very extreme form. So it's actually important to challenge those kind of violations and also come up with solidarity and also struggles to repeal all forms of draconian and problematic criminal laws, which are violating indigenous rights. And finally, of course, the communities have to come together in unity, solidarity, and also to resist for rights. The mobilization of communities, and I think that's the fundamental of defending our land and territory. And I agree with all. I would like to reiterate the assertions from the previous speakers that protecting environmental defenders, protecting the rights of human rights defenders, advancing and recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples is fundamental to address and to address the multiple crises that we are confronting. To serve to promote climate justice, it's important that we protect human rights defenders, and with that we call for stronger policy. We also call for stronger implementation of whatever policy existing to protect human rights defenders. And through that effort, that is the only way to promote human rights and also to promote climate justice. And I would like to end here, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiten. You have shared many interesting incomes from your region that we share in our region. But I want to point out one, the regulation. We are also suffering in the region the regulation process of the environmental laws, of the environmental impact assessment institutions, and this is something that we also have to face here. And now I would like to introduce to Joara Marchesini. She is elected representative of the public of the Escazú Agreement, is a very good friend of mine for almost 20 years fighting. She was in the negotiation of the agreement from the civil society side, sometimes crying of happiness, sometimes crying of sadness. So now I want to give you the floor to speak the connections of the Escazú Agreement with the environmental defenders and what we are doing there. So you have the floor.
Gracias, Carlos. Bueno, bom dia a todos e todas. Eu acho que já é boa tarde. Eu não vou competir com a comida. So, good afternoon, everyone. I promise I will be quick because I will not compete with the food. I know it's important for everyone. So, my name is Joara Marques, and I'm also one of the elected representatives of the public in Escazú Agreement, which Carlos already said. NUPEF is part of Movimento Escazú. Divide my explanation in 2 parts and 10 points. So we're going this way with a list. I think it's easy to understand because I know my English is not that good. So considering the most urgent next steps to achieve an effective and participatory implementation of the agreement in the country and the region. So my 5 points to support the discussion. First, I think it's important to raise knowledge of the agreement and fight misinformation. We talked about it in Lex's presentation. And we must generate and disseminate more information about the agreement itself using the principles that are in the agreement. For instance, we need to provide clear information. We need to communicate in advance. We also need to use appropriate terminology. Sometimes it's not easy to understand what people are saying. And also, we need to promote the agreement at national and territorial levels, not just on internet and not just during the COP period. Both government and civil society play an essential role on this. And we should push for massive campaigns and collaborate with various media channels, both traditional and alternative media. The second point is to ensure that we are prepared to assist participants when they come to COP and the previous activities. If we wish to promote the Escazú agreement, we must expand our procedures to guarantee public participation. The third point is to prepare a robust and participatory framework for human rights defender regional assessment and take into account public information. There is a lot of information that's produced by the public, and we know that we can contribute for the regional assessment. The fourth point is do not forget the other aspects of the agreement. We usually talk about human rights defenders and Escazú agreement, but we must remember there is access to information, participation, and access to justice agreement. And we cannot leave behind the whole view about the agreement itself. And 5, and last point about this first question, we need to continue to encourage national implementation, but not leave behind those countries who not ratified the agreement. And I have to mention particularly Brazil, because we have an excellent opportunity on COP30. And at this point, I need to ask for everybody that is in the room, please help us to promote the Escazú agreement in the COP, because we have this window of opportunity, and the agreement is now on our national Senate, and we want to participate at COP4 on Escazú agreement. Maybe we should do it in Brazil, since we have the structure itself. So let's push for the ratification in time. Regarding to the second question, how can we ensure human defenders, indigenous peoples, and Amazonian communities are not only consulted, but have a real voice and influence the environmental decisions? My 5 points to contribute to the discussion as well. First, we have to think that consultation is not bad if we do it good, if we do it properly. For instance, if we provide enough information and set favorable conditions for the participations. Related to that, we believe that people are tired of participation and not receive any response or explanation as why the decision was different than they expect. People frequently feel that they are participating, but the political decisions have been already taken. And also, in that sense, political will needs to change things. People need to feel comfortable and motivated to take part because they think the government is open to listen and learn. That's the important point for us. In this situation, the government should actively seek for the public and invite them rather than just putting on internet and expect that people to come. The fourth point is set attendance costs to ensure that specific groups are represented during the participation process. recognizing that at the majority of time, human rights defenders' work is a collective work, is not an individual work. We should respect and encourage the work of Amazonian communities, indigenous peoples, and human rights defenders while they are still living. Recognizing their work includes taking measures to prevent criminalization and defamation itself. The last point is to recognize and respect traditional knowledge and community customs. In the territory, time goes differently. Additional internal consultations and analysis process are differently that could be in our common work. And we must respect this time and this process of decision. So I want to thank you all for your patience with me and my English, and we hope to continue our talk in the last days of COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Joara. You have been fast and very accurate with time and also with the content. Unfortunately, we are running of time, so we don't have time for questions, but we can continue the conversation afterwards. And I just want to mention a couple of things. There is a clear correlation between strength democracies, strength institutions, rule of law, and economic development, and also environmental protection. Second, we need to strengthen our communities, and we need to focus in these people that are most vulnerable. Third, we need to consider that the access right, access to information, participation, and access to justice are tools to act. And it's a tool, so we need to use it, we need to knowledge about them, and we need to act. And finally, we need international cooperation. We have common problems. We have seen from India, we have seen here in the Amazons, but we have in Central America. The hurricane in Brazil happens as well in Jamaica and Cuba a month ago. So we need common cooperation, common solutions. And I will just thank you again, Club de Madrid, for gathering us together here, and Spain for this fantastic place and their patience for us. So thank you for the panelists. A big applause.